Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Crafting Grant Language to Increase Funding Success, presented by Diane Leonard. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Event Coordinator for the Native Learning Center, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. You can access today's presentation slides available for download, as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the courses page over on the left-hand side. It's going to be under courses. Just remember, if you do click on this red-hand side at any moment, it will take you out of today's webinar. So just keep that in mind. If you click anywhere on the red, it will take you out. It will, when you join the new platform and click that green banner, it will conduct an audio test before bringing you into the webinar. Please click listen only to avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing the webinar audio from, you can do so by clicking this phone icon. It will bring up a list of your speaker/mic devices, so you can select the one you prefer. To access important links, please click the shared notes. You can also access the chat box and send any messages or questions there. As we get started, let's introduce ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and send into the chat your name, where you're joining from, your work or role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation. One last final note, please remember that if you click anywhere on the red side, it will take you out. If you are taken out, have no fear. Just log back in and click that green banner, and it will take you back to today's webinar. It is now with a pleasure that I introduce and pass it off to Diane Leonard.
There we go. It's taken me just a few clicks to make the tech work today. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Crafting Grant Language to Increase Funding Success. Very excited and happy to be with all of you today. As we're getting started, I know that I recognize some of your names, and hello, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining the session, but I don't recognize everyone here, and so I'd love to take just a brief moment and introduce myself. I'm Diane, and I love all things grants. I've spent my entire career in the grant-related space, first as a grant maker on the foundation side, the last 20 plus years on the grant seeking side, and I continue to serve as a reviewer for foundations, so private philanthropy, private grants, and at the government level. So I've got a lot to say in terms of what works for language that will encourage a reviewer, a grant maker to say yes, to advocate for your funding. Now, that doesn't mean I have all the answers, because each funder by themselves is unique and different. But this is not, to me, what I wanted to highlight is it's not just theory. This is practical. This is tactical. I literally closed down a federal grant that our team is working on right now in order to come be with you and talk about the language that we want to use in order to increase our funding success. So all of your questions are welcome at any time. I love to see you use the chat box. And the chat box, totally optional for your participation. I want it to be something meaningful for you. I don't want it to be one extra or annoying thing. But if you are willing to let us know, let's go with as a prompt today, what's the weather like where you're joining us from today? I'm in far, far, far upstate New York, right on the St. Lawrence River. And ooh, it is a wintry mix. Snow, then sleet, then rain, then snow. Not quite sure what it's going to look like at any moment as I look out the window. So that's, well, making it a little easier to stay inside and keep writing grant-related stuff for me today. But if you want to let me know what is the weather like where you are today, that lets me know you're able to navigate to that chat box at any time if you have a question for me, because we've got a lot of material I want to cover today. And yes, we'll have an open Q&A session at the end of our time together, but I really love to see your questions in the chat box in the moment. Zero reason for you to hold them in a parking lot. If you have a question, right in the chat box is fine. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the alignment of language you use to describe your organization, your community, the work you're doing, and how that fits best with funder guidelines. We're going to talk about those tight limits that we experience, whether we're thinking character, word, or page limits. It is very rare that we are going to have a grant application where it is completely at our discretion for how much space we have to talk about our amazing work. And then we will move into talking about our mock review process, because that helps to bring fresh eyes to the idea of what language choice are we using and how will it best be received, how will it be understood by our grant maker. So those are the three main areas of focus today. Again, we'll have a Q&A at the end, but if you are comfortable in the chat box, I love to see questions right in the moment. Also, sometimes I ask questions, small questions, maybe a why for yes, N for no, or a word or a phrase. Always optional, but always appreciated if you've got a response that you're willing to share. And I see we've got a lot of variation in terms of and representation of where folks are joining us from today. And I see that we also have some very different weather from different parts of the country as well. I'm glad to hear, Deneen, that it's calm where you are today after yesterday's storm. And although cold, Melissa, I'm a little jealous of the sunshine today. That would be nice. Well, again, excited to have everyone here. And this first portion, this is something that we in the field of grant writers, grant professionals, nonprofit professionals, tribal organization members have been talking about for, I want to say ever, but we'll say at least decades. I can say to at least 2 decades, talking about how an organization customizes their language to best fit with a grant maker. Each grant maker is really unique and different in terms of why they are making grant awards, why it is that they might consider you to be a great fit for them. And so this idea, it is not new. It is not secret. It's not a shiny new idea. But it is one that takes extra time. And more than that, it takes extra time. It is what helps to set your application apart. Now, I do want to acknowledge that there is constant change in the grant making sector. Constant change. If there is one thing that I feel confident about for my 20 plus years in business, my 25 plus years as a grant professional, change is inevitable. This is true at the government level. This is true in foundations. Different funders have different changes based on their board leadership changes, executive director changes. Change is inevitable. Sometimes the change is good for our organizations. Sometimes it might feel challenging. So when we think about how our language aligns, please don't assume that because you have a clear idea of how you align your language with a funder once, that it's going to remain the same. We need to think about how we align our language with a funder each and every time that we might pick up their request for proposal, or we might pick up their notice of funding availability, or we might pick up their funding opportunity announcement. Whatever words they use to describe their guidelines, we need to think about it each and every time we look at the grant maker and never assume that their language preferences have remained the same. When we think about guidelines and what they look like and how they align with your work, there's some high-level things that we can consider. When we look at the guidelines, maybe it's just a small little section on their website. Maybe it's a 94-page set of guidelines that you downloaded off of grants.gov or somewhere in between. When you're looking at the particular set of guidelines, the first thing I'm going to want you to look at is, what does that grant maker require? And by that, I mean, what is it that they're asking of you? And what kind of language are they using in asking you questions? Once we've done that, and we're going to dig into all 4 of these items deeply together today, then we're going to think about, relative to what the grant maker wants, what they're asking us, what does your organization's theory of change say? What does it mean? How might you tell that story in a way that aligns with the grant maker's requirements? We're then going to think about, what does our logic model say, or our program design documents? What do those say? What is the language we use to describe the work that we want to do and our anticipated outcomes? Then you're right, we're going to look back to those guidelines and think about, how are we going to tell our story about the work we want to do and the outcomes and the impact we want to create in the way that aligns with the grant maker's guidelines. Have you caught on to the trend? There's what the grant maker wants, what they're asking for in the language they use, and then there's the language we want to use. And somewhere along the line, somewhere along the way, what we need to really come to terms with as an organization is, what is it we can say, therefore, what is it that we will type and write that will help our grant maker have the best understanding? To each and every grant maker, you, your work, your tribal organization, your particular community, you're unique, you're doing complex things to address complex community needs, and they want to understand it as best they can, but they've got a lot that they're reading. So how can you help those grant makers, those funders, digest your very complex methodologies and ideas and uniqueness in as fast a way as possible? When we look at our applications and we think about what it is that each grant maker is looking for, again, each grant maker will be different. There is a fantastic, albeit old, blog post that was written by a colleague of mine. Her name is Allison Jones, and she wrote this article way back, wait for it, in 2018. And the title of her article was, "If You've Met One Foundation, You've Met One Foundation." I've just dropped the link to this particular article in the chat box if you'd like to read it. The reason that I like to cite this particular phrase by Allison is that, while yes, her point in the article is about foundations, whether it be family foundations, community foundations, private foundations, corporate foundations, but I argue that you could replace the word foundation with grant maker, and it is just as accurate of a statement. So here, I'll do that verbally. What would it sound like? If you've met one grant maker, ... you've met one grant maker. Each grant maker is different. They have their own preferences related to language. They have their own preferences related to what they want to spend their funding on. They have their own preferences related to how and if they will speak to you before you apply. So this first section that we're going to talk about, what does the grant maker require? We're going to approach this by thinking about, what do the guidelines say? Each set of guidelines is unique, and we need to analyze it on its own. But there's also the potential for those additional best practices, trying to talk to a grant maker before you apply, that might give you some insight beyond what is in their written word. And you know what? We've got such a great group of folks here, and I'm guessing, just a wide variety of things you're doing. I know geographically we've got a very diverse group of folks here. Could you let me know in the chat box, please, some unit of time? How long have you been working with grants? Perhaps it's 15 minutes. That's fantastic. It might be 15 weeks, 15 months, 15 years, but I just would like to get a sense of your experience level related to grants with the folks that are here in the room with us today. So if you're willing to share that in the chat box, I would really appreciate it. When we think about what does the grant maker require, I, after 20 plus years in the field, am still sometimes surprised by what we might find in the guidelines. Oh, that's a new way to ask a question, or I haven't seen it quite that way. So I'm sometimes just as surprised and trying to figure out what they're asking as you might be if you are looking at a particular type of funder for the first time or still feeling more comfortable getting an increased level of skill and experience in the grant field. Oh, but I see I'm glad I asked. We have a really wide range of experience in the room here. So for those of you that are a little more seasoned in your experience, at any point, I welcome your participation in the chat box to share tips and tricks and thoughts about what we're sharing today as well. Please feel free to do so. Now, I'm going to show a few real examples. And there's a lot that we could take away from them, but I want to point out a few particular things. In this example, this is from a foundation. And so it was a private foundation that was asking for, oh, how wonderful, a free form narrative. It was page limited, but it was at the discretion of the applying organization for exactly how much space they were going to use out of their 3 pages for the information you see listed on the screen. So they wanted some pretty typical things. How much money do you want? Cool, good, we know what our request amount is. And then they wanted to know, what project or program are you asking for funding for? Okay, good, nice factual things right now. They wanted a summary of the need or the demand for the project or program. All right, so maybe some census data, maybe some Department of Labor data, maybe a needs assessment from your community, maybe some data from the Annie E. Casey Foundation Kids Count data book. What is it that shows why this is needed and proves that you are experts for this particular project you're going to put forward? You best understand the need in your community. Wow, I just interpreted a whole lot from one single point on the screen, didn't I? Item 4, a project budget and a project timeline. Okay, they're trying to understand the scale of the project cost and the amount of time it's going to take us to do this proposed work. Great. But I have the arrow pointing at this 5th item. Describe activities, goals, and community impact for the program or project. There's a lot of basic program or project information that the grant maker is asking for. And sort of buried within this 5th point is the idea that they want to know about the impact you're creating. I argue this is the most important thing they're asking you. Once they close your proposal and they go to read the next and the next and the next and get ready for the meeting or the conference call or the Zoom call that they're going to be a part of, they're not going to remember, oh, that was the one that wanted $17,500. Oh, that was the one that was going to take place in the 2026 calendar year. Oh, that was the one that asked for $10,000. That is not what they will remember. What they will remember are the snippets, their short understanding of the impact that you're going to create. Oh, that's the one that's going to reduce food insecurity in the community. Oh, that's the one that's going to ensure that there are safe playground structures for the children in the community. Oh, that's the one that fill in the blank. So here's what I would love to hear from you in the chat box if you're willing. I want you to think about one high priority project or program that you want to get grant funding for your tribal organization this calendar year. And if you were to, in a phrase, a few words, No more than one sentence. What is the impact that you would want me as a reviewer to remember, regardless of how much money you're going to ask me for? You can put as many zeros after this theoretical request as you want. But could you type in the chat box, please, a few words, a phrase, as I said, maybe up to a sentence. What is the community impact for the number one thing you need to get grant money for this year? Now it's going to take you just a moment. I'll make sure to give you that moment. I'll have a sip of water to ensure that I'm quiet long enough for you to type that impact phrase in. All right, I can see that multiple users are typing. I can't wait to see your words or your phrases as it relates to community impact. What is it that you would want the grant maker to remember? There is no right or wrong answer here. We are not going to judge or wordsmith what you share in the chat box. I'm trying to understand, what is it about your work that you would want for the grant maker to remember? This is also going to be fun because it'll give me an idea about your specific projects and programs. All right, we've got some starting to come in. Let's see, Dawn has shared community impact. Clean water, absolute by itself, if that was the phrase of what someone would remember. As a result of this, the community will have clean water. Hard stop, love that. Also, mitigation of bad health. Related to, coming from, as a result of illegal dumping of hazardous pollutants. You've got multiple important impact statements within that one statement. Dawn, thank you so much for sharing. That is what you want the reviewer to remember when they close your PDF, when they put down the packet that they're reading. That is absolutely, I want to see this proposal get funded because they're going to ensure that their community has clean water. That is something you should be really proud of a grant maker remembering after they read all the technical answers and the cited data. Wonderful. Okay. So when we think about what that community impact sounds like, we've got something coming in here from Brittany as well. Let's see, having a cultural center for the tribe with dedicated space for the revitalization of community arts that were dwindled or lost during the COVID-19 pandemic. So cultural space, the loss of something. So therefore the bringing back of resources and a sense of community and access to the arts. Wonderful. Again, lots of ideas that are built into that one statement that you've made, that if a grant maker remembered even a portion of it, if they remembered cultural center, if they remembered dedicated space, if they remembered revitalization of arts in the community, any portion of the words that you shared there would help the grant maker to go, yes, this is the one I want to fund. Yep, I'm going to speak up for this one right here. Excellent. So let's look at another example of guidelines. Now, whereas the first example from the foundation, very big, broad questions, very typical types of questions. Now we're looking at a grant maker who is asking in a very limited structure, not just about what it is you will do, but about what you have done. What is it that you have recently done? So this particular grant maker, whether you had received funding from them in the past or not, was asking about what is it that you use? What are your methods for evaluating your progress? What were the goals set by your organization last year? And what is the progress you have made towards achieving them? What are any significant outcomes and key learnings in the past year? How many people did you serve this last year? Talk to us about the population demographics of those you served last year. Now, yes, within these guidelines, there were multiple questions that were asked about the future. What will you do? But this grant maker, what their guidelines were asking was heavily focused not just on what we will do, but also tell us about your past success. Tell us about your past performance. What they're looking for is to understand if your past performance, your recent successes, your recent challenges and learnings, how is it they're influencing what you're going to do, what you think you can accomplish moving forward. So even if you're doing something very different than your past activities, the grant maker still is using your past successes to make some judgments about what will you accomplish, what is your likelihood of accomplishing it moving forward. If you want to think about some recent successes, something, if you reflect back, here I just asked you a question about looking forward. If you look backwards, if you think back to 2024, what is the thing that you would be most excited to brag about? This is beyond humble brag. This is truly brag. What is it that you would be so excited to showcase and say your organization, your tribal organization achieved in 2024? It could be a really big, broad statement. It could be a very small, tactical statement. But if you are willing to share in the chat box, and I'll type this out, what is something that you are incredibly proud of from 2024 that your organization did? I cannot apparently say that out loud and type it at the same time today, but there we go. I've got it in the chat box. If you are willing to answer this question, this is a broader question than any of the nuanced questions you see on the screen. But similar to the question I asked you about impact, I wanted to hear in your own words how you would talk about impact before you worried about trying to answer it in the guidelines. This set of guidelines is making you think not only about what's going to happen in the future, but what happened in the past. I would rather hear you talk about it in your own words, without any limits, without any of the very specific questions. I would rather hear about what are you so excited about? What are you so proud about that recently happened? And then let's think about how to answer it. So if you're willing to share something here that you are incredibly proud of, something that your tribal organization accomplished in 2024, what would that be? This is kind of fun too. Always love to give everyone a chance to brag about your work, brag about the accomplishments and the impact that you're creating. In fact, I have our yellow smiley dingy bell here ready to ring as you think about what you're so proud of in this past year. It can be work that you directly were a part of, work that you helped get funding for, work that you're aware of. I know it's going to take another moment for you to type, so we'll go for some water again. So I'm quiet and I let you type. All right, Jenny's first in with the humble brag, the repatriation of over 50, oh wow, from like the 1800s, over 50 historic cultural items from museums around the country back to your tribe. Jenny, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that success. That is something to be incredibly proud of. And you're right, if that's something that you were able to say as a tribal organization for 2024, if you're looking for grant support to continue repatriating items, that success gives the grant maker a really good indicator of your likelihood of success moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful. All right, we'll let folks have just another few seconds here if you're willing to share something that when you're thinking about what happened last year, If you were to try and think about how do I want to present our success this past year, what might you draw from? Let's see. So EPICS is proud of your annual EPICS Native American Special Education Conference. 333 attendees and 29 workshops. Not to mention overall awesome evaluations. Oh, Melissa, there is so much in what you just typed there. Fantastic. Yep, getting the dingy bell out again for both of those. So what does that help the grant maker to understand? Both you and Jenny have shared within your, I'm like, the fact those were numbers you all had right at the top of your head. How many attendees, how many workshops, how many items? Those outputs, the things that you can count as a result of your work, are a great indicator for a grant maker of what might you be able to accomplish in this upcoming year. Fantastic. The specificity of what you could quickly share is fantastic. All right, and then let's see, Brittany shared, proud of the cultural services programs work, getting recognized at various levels, state for the library, national for the archives, for work that they've done throughout 2023 and 2024. Amazing. The recognition of others in the field, broader outside of your community, can also then be used to help the grant maker understand, indeed, we're amazing at what we do. We're being recognized by others in our field at being amazing at what we're doing. And grant maker, you should want to be a part of that too. Love it. Absolutely. 3 very different types of stories of impact and past success that you can use. And yes, fit into these very short 5 sentences here, 5 sentences there type responses. But your overall point, what you want the grant maker to walk away with beyond these specific answers, is that broad understanding of pride that you have about the work that you've done. One more example. This time I'm shifting into government. And this is some very specific government guideline language. This comes from a Health and Human Services SAMHSA proposal, so Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. And they're very standard guidelines related to data required each and every time in their 10-page narrative application, is that they want to know what is it that you are collecting from data, for data, I should say. Whom are you collecting it from? How are you collecting it? What is it that you're going to have in terms of any data or samples that you will be using? And talk to us about protocols, tools. Are they standardized tools? Are they custom tools? Things that you as an organization have built, things that are nationally accepted as a survey that you might use. They want to understand everything about your evaluation and data collection process. Now, this is just a small segment of these guidelines. There's even more to it. They want to know about how you're protecting the identity of individuals, if there's any identifying information. They want to make sure that there's consent related to collecting information and data. This is really technical information. And so if we're thinking about what the grant maker requires and the language choices that we're using, when we get into very specific, and ultimately we're headed into very technical evaluation language, we want to mirror and reflect back the language of what's being used so that the grant maker and the reviewers are certain that what has been asked has been answered. And what that means to me and what it feels an awful lot like is, now I'm reflecting way back to when I would be in English class, maybe in junior high, maybe in high school, but the idea that you would reflect the question back that was being asked using the language of the question so that there is certainty by the grant maker that they are reading about what is required for them to judge, for them to score. So that if they're talking about identifying from whom you will collect data, we will collect data from very basic mirroring, so that your grant maker is never feeling lost or asking themselves, wait a second, did I find that information? I think I missed it. And especially when we control formatting to help our reviewers find the language that they need within a proposal, headings, italicized, underlined, bolded, things that are basically like mile markers on the road to help them find where they are within the proposal is a great way so that they don't miss any of the language that you have so carefully crafted to mirror their requirements. Now, within these different guidelines, I mean, these are three very distinctly different types of grant makers and information that they're looking for and things they're funding. We literally could spend the whole day just looking at guidelines. We wouldn't run out of variation. We know that each and every time you pick up a grant application, you're going to find something that's nuanced to that grant maker. That's the first thing you need to understand. Take the time to review their guidelines and think about what is it that they're asking. And before I worry about my specific answer, let me think at a high level about what I have or what I might want my main point to be. Now I want to think about what is it that's important to us as an applicant, as an organization? What is it that we know? We know at our core. We know because of who we are as a tribal organization. We know because of our past programs and projects. And so where I'd like to start that, what do we know, is related to our theory of change. In the chat box, could you please let me know your comfort level with the idea of a theory of change for an organization? 1, if it's something that you're learning about for the first time today. 10, if you love and feel very comfortable with theories of change. There is no judgment at all in the answer here. I just want to have a sense of comfort level before I dig deep. All right, so it looks like, thank you, we've got a lot of folks learning about theory of change today. And so for those, I know we also have some folks who've been in grants for a while. If you want to chime in with any of your understanding as well, that's great too. So the theory of change is not language that you will see in lots of grant proposals. They're not going to ask you for your theory of change. Some will, but it is not the majority. But the questions of the grant maker are anchored in trying to understand your theory of change. So on the screen, I have 2 visual representations of a theory of change. There is a basic theory of change as our top image. Multi-strategy is our second image on the bottom half. What a theory of change shows for an organization is that if we do this thing, or if we do these things, in our community that we're serving, we will get these results. So in a tribal organization, if you do what? If you are delivering hot meals to folks that are homebound, and if you are providing a school backpack program, and if you are running a hot meal site as well. Well, those are 3 strategies in service of the result of reducing food insecurity in the community. So what are the activities or the strategies? So strategies makes us think a little higher level than tactical activities, but it's okay to think about either. What are the things that you do as an organization in order to get your results? Could you let me know in the chat box, based on my initial quick explanation, do you think that your organization has a single strategy, so it's a basic theory of change that you do to get your results? Or do you think it's a multi-strategy theory of change? Go ahead and type basic or multi in the chat box for me if you have a sense of which one might describe your organization. Are you doing one thing primarily to get your results? Or are you doing multiple things to get your results. There is not a right or wrong answer. Organizations can be just as successful and amazing and get all sorts of grant money being a basic theory of change type of organization or being a multi-strategy theory of change organization. I want you to think about what it sounds like. Maybe even if you want to like grab a sticky note, that's a tiny little sticky note to draw on, but or a notebook or the back of a piece of paper. Maybe you even want to draw the rectangle, sort of like I have them on the screen. What is the strategy or the strategies that we do as an organization in order, so that's the arrow, to achieve our results? This is something that you want your grant maker to understand as they read all of your information, regardless of the structure of their guidelines. You want them to understand we do this in order to achieve this. If anyone wants to take a moment and type into the chat what they have just maybe quickly written down or drawn, would love to hear it, but not required. This idea actually comes with a little book recommendation too as a related idea. My good colleague and friend Tamsin Webster, she wrote this book, Find Your Red Thread. And it's a great book if you love reading or listening to an audiobook of it. But the reason I talk about it and think about it was the first time I heard Tamsin talk about it on stage at a conference. She was talking about how you engage donors and grant makers and the idea that you're going to share lots of details, but what is the thread that carries them through all your materials, through your request letter, through your grant? As they read all that, it's a lot to take in. But by the time they're done, what is the thing they remember? What is it that you have used as a common point throughout the entire application, the entire body of request? You want your grant maker, when they are done, after reading all these different character counted responses, you want them to remember, if we do these things, or if we do this thing, we're going to get these results. There's a lot of other detail that the reviewer will not retain in that short period of time. They will understand it as they're reading it, but they won't retain it when they go to quickly talk about it with the reviewers. So as you think about this theory of change, basic or multi, when you print out your guidelines or when you save them as a PDF to your computer, and maybe when you open your first draft and you're trying to think about what am I going to say and how am I going to say it, before you worry about what particular language you're going to use for that grant maker, put at the top of the paper, what is it that you don't want them to leave without knowing? You want them to know we do this to get this impact. Now, if you have questions about theory of change, by all means, be typing them in the chat box because I appreciate y'all telling me who was really learning about this for the first time today. Now, I know that I said to you, it is rare that you will see theory of change in the questions by a grant maker. You probably thought, then why are you telling us about this, Diane? It's okay. I understand. You probably did think that. I would too. But here on the screen now, I have questions that are from real proposals that are actually drawn from, you can write an answer to this if you know your theory of change. What need are we addressing or what problem are we solving? An organization that knows we do this to get that will be able to say, well, we do this to get that because, and fill in what is the need or the problem. So your answer is actually rooted in your theory of change. How do we know our solution will work? The grant maker is asking, please help me understand why you do those strategies. Why did you pick those methodologies? Why did you pick that approach to design for your archives work, for your learning objectives and conference design? Why did you decide to do it that way? That's what they want to understand with that question. When grant makers are asking about what are your evidence-based practices, again, they're asking you about why did you pick the strategies that you did? Help them to understand why your organization, why your group has decided on those particular strategies. What will happen as a result of our work? Oh, if we go back just one slide, they're asking about that second half of the theory of change model. They want that rectangle that's after the arrows. Tell us about your result or your results, plural, that you think will happen as a result of your work. So now that I've shown it to you in a slightly different way with some different questions from proposals that are really rooted in your theory of change, I'm curious, how many of you have seen questions like this in grant proposals before? Y for yes in the chat box, N for no. How many of you recognize questions like this from grant proposals? So some of you do recognize these, but you might not have had the label of theory of change. So now you have a broader understanding of where does this question come from? Why is the grant maker asking us this? What's interesting, so some of you are like, oh, I recognize this. Also were folks who said, oh, I'm learning about theory of change for the first time. You just didn't have that formal label for why grant makers are asking you that. I hope that that was like, oh, cool, that's going to help, right? Because then once we understand our theory of change, I consider that to be like the 30,000 foot overview. We're at the top of the mountain and we're thinking about the work we're going to do, but we are really high level. We're practically up in the clouds. And when we start to tell our grant maker more about our work, what we're doing is we're climbing down the mountain closer to ground level. We want to think about what our logic model says or our related program design documents. The reason that I like to talk so much about the way that you as an organization describe your work, what you do, why you do it, how you want to do it, is so that when you have this clear understanding about who you are and how you tell your story, then you can think about what are comfortable language choices that you may, or, well, they might feel uncomfortable, so may not make when you look at specific grant makers and their guidelines. So the logic model, this is taking our theory of change, our 30,000 foot overview, and now we're probably, I'm gonna say we're at like 10,000 feet. We're starting to give our grant maker a deeper understanding of what those strategies would look like. What sort of resources might we need in order to complete those strategies? What sort of things might we be able to count or report on? What sort of outcomes might there be? So I have another question about your comfort level on a scale of 1 to 10. What is your comfort level as it relates to logic models? Again, logic models or other program design documents. We'll go broadly with that idea. But what would be your comfort level with logic models or program design documents? Something that is a consolidated version. A logic model is usually one page that is helping to give a high level, so 10,000 foot overview of the types of activities we would do and resources we would need and timelines for achieving some outcomes. So go ahead and let me know. Again, no judgment on what your answer is or is not in the chat box in terms of the number. We know we've got a wide range of experience. So sort of expect a wide range of experience with logic models too. We see more grant makers that ask for a logic model than theories of change. By far, we see more grant makers that ask about logic models. But still probably 50-50. However, we see lots and lots and lots of questions that are drawn from a logic model, even when not an attachment nor never mentioned by name for the grant maker. And some examples of those are on your screen. What are the key activities you will perform? What program inputs do you need? How do you define success for this program? What are the expected outcomes? How many of you recognize those questions from applications you may have worked on? Go ahead and let me know in the chat box why for yes if you recognize any of these questions from applications, or N for no if you don't. Again, without the label, these are all drawn from our logic model. Now, I would love to have you build this for your project, your program, or your organization while we talk through it. So if you're willing, maybe again, grab some sticky notes, maybe, oops, throwing my pen, you grab a notebook off your desk, back of an envelope, maybe you open a document and you start typing. But I would love to have you make some notes so that you're building your logic model as we move along. To do that, I want you to be thinking about that priority project or program that you need to get grant funding for in the balance of this year. That'll help you so that you can grab some ideas, start to jot some things down. Where I want to start is with our inputs. Our inputs are our resources. Sometimes we'll see grant makers ask about the resources you need. Sometimes we'll see them ask about what inputs you need. What are the resources that are needed to successfully implement the program? I'm giving you an example here. The program I'm going to think about trying to get funded is I want to focus on an initiative to, have healthier community members. And so I'm going to tell you what those activities are in a moment. So my theory of change is that if we offer a wide variety of educational opportunities and supports, we will have healthier community members. So that's my 30,000 foot overview. As I'm thinking at the 10,000 foot level, now I want to think about what are the resources or the inputs I need. It might be that we need some staff and some interns, some volunteers. I'm going to need some space for these different activities. I'm going to probably need some educational materials, resources, handouts. Probably going to need some other funding. The way to think about resources and inputs are what are the things that will go in your budget. Even if you think it might be space you get donated or food you get donated or equipment you get donated, it all goes in our input or our resource list. So take a moment and jot some of those things down, please. We now would have our basic answers if a grant maker asked us, what resources do you need in order to achieve your desired results? There we go. What resources do you need to achieve your desired results? Wait a second, I have my language ready to go. I've got a very short, quick list of the things I need. And I can expand upon it in my response, but the basic language of what I need to answer the funder's specific question is right there. So we could move on to the second part of our logic model. We want to think about our activities. What are the things that we would do? In my example, I'm saying that we might have healthy eating classes, maybe some things related to different choices when dining out, maybe some classes focused on using a variety of different cooking fats in order to make your meals healthier at home. Maybe we're offering some different exercise classes, so everything from chair yoga to spinning class. Doesn't matter what the activities are. They're what we think are most important. But if I, at my 10,000 foot overview, look up to my theory of change and the strategies I may have articulated in that theory of change, I should see a direct connection from strategy to our activities in the logic model. So the way to think about them, they can be processes. So it could be evaluation related, survey related. It could be about using tools to conduct these activities. It could be about events, different actions. It could be about tutoring, meal delivery, caregiver education, anything that we're doing that then is going to help bring about our impact, bring about the changes, bring about our results. Oh, I used the results word again because our activities, we're looking up at our theory of change, and our strategies should align with the slightly more nuanced, more detailed activities that we're going to list in our logic model. If anyone has any activities in mind that they have jotted down in their logic model, I would love to hear. Once you have your activities laid out, we can start to think about our outputs. Now, this is what I was so excited and surprised by when I asked you to brag about the work that you have done in 2024. You quickly, two of you in particular, were able to quickly share outputs with me. The number of attendees, the number of workshops, the number of cultural items. What you shared is related to impact, but those are the things you can count and report on to a grant maker. So grant makers love to know about their impact. And sometimes they will specifically ask, how many people will you serve? What outputs will you report? Those are both very direct ways to understand what are the things you're going to count during your grant award period and report to us at the end of the award period. Share with us at the end in your grant report. So in my example, it could be that it's the number of people enrolled in the program, the number of healthy eating workshops that took place, the number of exercise classes, maybe a collective number of exercise classes, maybe a certain number for chair yoga and a certain number for spinning classes. Maybe I presented a few different ways. But thinking about what you want to count, what you would want to report on is going to help you be prepared so that you can think about what is the grant maker asking me and how do I want to present and align our information with what they're asking. Once we have our inputs or resources, our activities, our outputs, the things we count, we can then think about our outcomes. So our outcomes can be broken into 3 common time periods. We'll see outcomes that are presented on programs and projects that are short-term, intermediate, and long-term. Regardless of the time period for outcomes, what grant makers are trying to understand is what are the changes in knowledge, behavior, skills. What is it that you are impacting as a result of your activities, as a result of your work? When we think about our outcomes on the screen, this is an example of short-term. Things that are happening in the weeks to maybe month 1 or 2 after a program or a project takes place. In my example, it might be that there was an increase in knowledge self-reported by participants related to the healthy fat substitutes for cooking. It could be that either maybe the trainer, so the staff, or the participants self-reported an increased number of their active minutes per day. So we'd have data that would be informing what did we achieve. One was an increase in knowledge. One was an increase in behavior. If we went a little further, let the program run longer, we might end up with an intermediate. It might be an intermediate outcome that has taken place maybe months 3, 4, and 5 to like maybe the end of year 1. It could be that in addition to talking about increased knowledge that was retained about the healthy fats that could be used for cooking, maybe also there was some maintained increased level of active minutes per day. Maybe at this point also you expect that if this program goes as planned, we will see participants self-reporting that they have lost weight. If you're able to track the work and the impact of what you've done, maybe you continue to see the same community members, or maybe you're able to share surveys far, far down the line, if you were able to talk with folks. But even if you're not able to talk with folks, this is your theory of what would happen. Maybe it's 1 year, 2 year, 5 years out. What do you expect to be the long-term outcomes? This is starting to point out what is the impact, the overall impact that you're creating. What would be the self-reported behavioral change, the lifestyle change, the maintained weight loss that has been achieved by participants? What does it look like in terms of the impact that you created for healthy eating, active living habits? How much healthier is your community? What metrics might you watch? When we think about these different elements of our logic model, what they're helping us to do is be ready to tell our story. If we know what is important to us at the 30,000-foot view for our theory of change, at our 10,000-foot view for our logic model, if we understand our design of what we want to do, whether it's something like a healthy eating program or the delivery of education or even an infrastructure project, we need to understand what are we doing and what things do we need? What is it we're going to be able to show or count? What are the benefits that we're creating, the outcomes that we're going to create? We are preparing ourselves to be great grantees once we get the grant money, sure, because we'll be able to report on it. If we're looking at our grant makers' proposal questions, that helps to inform, again, what is it we want to say? How do we want to present our information so that the grant maker feels comfortable, feels like they understand that they want to support us, they want to say yes? What is the language you want to use? And by you, I mean you as an organization. The language that you choose to use within your community that is your choice. It could be something as small as healthcare, 1 word, versus healthcare, 2 words. It could be language that you use to describe. We actually just had this conversation with an organization earlier this week. The difference between low literacy or at risk, when we have nuanced language choices available to us, they mean different things sometimes in our organization, within our operating space and walls, than they might to a grant maker. So what is it that is your choice in language? How does that align with what you're seeing in grant makers' guidelines? So back to the first part of our conversation today, what is in the grant makers' guidelines? What is on their website? What is in their materials for the application? What is it that they are presenting for? What is their purpose, their priority, their goal that they're trying to achieve? You're trying to find out if you are well aligned. The fact that you're talking about applying means that you think that you are. Now you're trying to decide what about the language we naturally use as an organization, what is going to be our best choice to help ensure that our grant maker understands who we are, what we want to do, why we want to do it. I want to give a different example. We're going to, again, look at theory of change and logic model and evaluation, but this time by looking at some segments of language. So if we're thinking about a funder who is saying that they want to support mental health in communities, they want to support the improved mental health in communities, and that is their big, broad statement. Pretty big, right? Pretty broad, lots of room for what that might look like. Our theory of change is if we do this thing or these things, we will get these results. So on the screen, I have some language choice. All three of these blocks of text, please note, are in different shades of green because I would like to indicate that all of this language could get a thumbs up, could be funded, could be just the right thing. What you want to consider in making your language choice, what is best for helping the grant maker to understand about your work? So language in your proposal would be good if it can tell the grant maker what the program does. Now, DBSA stands for an organization that offers peer support groups. Well, I'm reading you what it says for what it does, but this is a true, real organization. DBSA offers weekly peer support groups for those living with mood disorders. That's helpful for a grant maker to understand. That gives us some basic building blocks of understanding. What would be better for a reviewer to understand about what it is that you do? Because that first one, the good, that told us what is the strategy. That told us a little bit about the activity or the activities. It's those peer support groups. But it's a bit better if we can help to understand how. How does this methodology work? Why is this important? Well, it's important as a theory of change. It's important for our design, our logic model, because the support is being provided from those who have been there, those who have found themselves in that space before, and then are helping others who are there in that situation now. That's telling a little bit about why for our strategy, why for our activities. What is best? If we can talk about and describe in our language what is it that is going to result? What is it that is going to occur as a result of the activities? So if the grant maker knows that the participants feel more connected to others and less isolated from others, that is the result. So the good text on the left gave us some understanding of the strategy. The best text on the right is if it is additive, these three together, we now have a high level, as a grant maker, we would have a high level understanding of what it is you want to do. In picking what exactly your sentences say, certainly looking at the language the grant maker has used, how it is that they're talking perhaps about peer support groups or how they're talking about mood disorders, there might be some language choices that you choose to make for alignment with a grant maker. But this structure on the screen shows us, well, it's one thing if we tell them what we do. Good. It's another if we help them understand why we picked this strategy. And it is best if we connect all of those dots by telling them what we will achieve. What is the result? These three statements on the screen are part of that 30,000-foot overview, our theory of change. Ready to come back down to 10,000 feet with me? We're going to do logic model again. But we're going to follow this particular program idea. Unlike my health example we were using in the first portion, now we're thinking about logic models and we're following this peer support group idea. So again, our logic model is taking the strategies from theory of change and giving some more detail in the activity section. And we're going to talk about our results from our theory of change and hear more about them by thinking about our outcomes, our short, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. Following with the text of that peer support group idea, the good description, without using logic model language by the grant maker or by us as the applicant, the good language we would start with can describe the program or project activities. The support groups, they meet for 90 minutes. They're led by a trained peer facilitator. Support groups are free and confidential. We've just learned an awful lot about what these activities are. They have deepened our understanding of the overall strategy of these peer support groups. We now have and could probably visualize much more accurately what these look like. But it could be better. Still all in green text, but again, additively, it will be a better, a stronger, more complete answer if we add to that basic description how these activities will help. How do they help achieve the results? Participants feel accepted by peers who understand their challenges and will respect confidentiality. Okay, we're getting somewhere. We now understand what sort of impacts this is creating. Now going back to our theory of change and our high level, what are the results that we're trying to achieve? What is it we're going to report? What could we measure? What could we use as proof that we have achieved what we set out to do? So we get to the third block of text. Our overall response is best if it not only describes program activities, if it not only describes how the activities would help the clients or community members, but also describes the linkages between the activities and the outcomes. And that additional bit of text is that if 75% of support group participants report decreased isolation due to their attendance at groups, we might be in fantastic shape understanding for our grant maker. Our theory of change to our logic model to our evaluation. When we think about evaluation, yes, what did we count? Number of people at the support group, number of meetings. If we think about what makes it even stronger, what percent of participants self-reported their decreased isolation as a result of participating? So now it's not just about, well, how many were held and how many people attended, but like you said in that chat box earlier, what were those awesome evaluation results from the conference? Those point towards the impact. And what's even better than better is our best. Those three blocks of text combined, if persons living with mood disorders show improved quality of life as a result of support group participation, that is the ultimate result of what was described in the theory of change. So how would we be able to tell a grant maker that was what happened? So your theory of change, your logic model, and pointing towards how will we measure, what will we evaluate, is helping your grant maker to understand what it is you're going to do, why are you going to use their funds, how are you going to be absolutely the best grantee to create the impact for your project or program that's aligned with their purpose or goals. Now, of course, we saw with those initial guidelines, we can see some different unique questions. Add to that the joy of character counting. Doing an entire project description in 2,000 characters, oh boy, that's tight. Answering an entire response in 600 characters, also extremely tight. What I encourage you to watch for are things like scoring tips. We saw those in both of those particular screenshots. And ask yourself, within these very teeny tiny responses, what is it that the grant maker is asking us for? I want you to think about your big high level theory of change, your big broad logic model, and think about how can I give you this information, even though you are breaking it apart into different puzzle pieces that have to eventually be put back together into one coherent understanding. If you know your logic model first, you can look at these truncated, chunky, clunky, different questions and think about where and how will I put these different pieces of information. When we see things like an 850 character counted response, oh, how do you align with this huge development plan? Wow, that is unfair on so many levels for how you're going to respond to it. And yes, the grant maker gave some nice scoring tips. But how can you make sure that what is in here is the most important thing that will add to your overall understanding and get you all the points? Better to know your story, what is important to you. What's important to you? Your theory of change and your logic model, whether you use that language or not, that is what is important to you that you want to ensure gets into the proposals so that the grant maker has as complete an understanding about your work as possible. Yet you're still, of course, answering their very specific questions. So often I'm looking for where are there other spots that I can build on the story if I feel like we have gotten too pinched for space to tell the full story. Maybe I had room only for the good portion of response about our activities. I'm looking for a little more space. Are there other opportunities to describe in more detail, not just what the activities are, but who would do them and when would they take place? What are the other spaces that are available? What other types of questions are being asked? When I'm thinking about the very difficult space constraints that we're faced with, a clue like the one on the screen here, you don't have to read all the text. That's not the point of this example, but rather to say if you look at this third line in the project description question, it says additional details will be collected later in the application process. To which I say, oh, thank you, because I don't know how you were going to let me describe the entire project, indicating where it was and how it was planned and when it will be designed and acquired and constructed. And that is too much for 1,200 characters, dear grant maker. So now your clue, additional details will be collected later. Okay, where are those? Because I need to go look at and lay out my 3 or 4 puzzle pieces I have to think about my project description, which is my theory of change and my logic model. How am I going to break that information across the sections to ensure the best understanding by my reviewer? When we think about space, we don't want to waste space. So I have a few very tactical suggestions. These come to you special from Krista, the copy editor on our team at TH Leonard Consulting. These are things that Krista is always doing to try and help our writers not accidentally waste space. So just in case you had not considered these before. So I grew up in a time, I actually had typing class. Mrs. Gaddy, she was fantastic. She's where I learned to type incredibly fast. Probably why I'm okay to be a grant professional today. She helped me get really fast at typing. But I was taught to put double spaces after periods. And every once in a while, not only between, I'll just be like, why do I have double spaces? Well, heavy on the space bar. But there are still well-intentioned folks who will double space, and that's taking up a lot of character space in our responses. So that's something to quick watch for. When we're thinking about our accidental typing mistakes, right, that's something to ask our editors to help with or to do some quick find tools when we're doing our editing. And it might sound silly and funny to think about extra periods or hard returns, but when we go from our word processing tools into the portals we might be applying to, they often will add extra. I was in one today and I was like, why are there 2 extra hard returns in between each paragraph? I'm looking at the word processing document and there's just one. And sure enough, though, as I watched what it was doing as we were entering information into it, it just kept taking up more of our allowable space. So trying to do everything you can in advance to ensure you've not wasted any space should help then to minimize stress at the time of submission. I know, super tactical, but hopefully not a stressor then at the moment of submission. But speaking of submission, if you're thinking about your guidelines and comparing your guidelines, what the grant maker wants, to what is it that we want to say about our work? What is our theory of change? What is our logic model? Know our language, our good, better, best. If we know that first, then what we're doing during our application is thinking about the best way to word it, the best way to word it in those character limits, in that word limit, in that page limit. Before we submit, what it then gives us the opportunity to do is to say not just, well, how well did we tell our story? You've already thought about your story because you pre-prepared, you thought about that theory of change in your logic model in advance. What you've been doing is translating your information into the grant maker's structure. So I'm guessing that you've got a review process in place right now. And there's probably some multiple steps for how you review, and then maybe you get somebody to copy edit, and then you might have a collaborative partner look at it, and eventually it gets reviewed and approved and you can submit. Maybe it's not quite that linear. Maybe there's different steps that are happening concurrently in order to get to the point where you're ready to review and submit. If your work is anything like mine in process, there will be times where I would imagine you have heard things like, yeah, it looks great, no edits. There's a comma right here. Those are helpful. It's not helping us in terms of crafting that language that will increase success, though, for that specific grant maker. These copy editing moments, they're taking the editor's opinion and, yes, you're right, APA style guide or MLA style guide into consideration. But what we're really looking for before we submit is to have the opportunity for someone to say to us, now this is great, but I wonder if you might try something different here so that it is closer to what the grant maker's language is, or that it might be better understood by the grant maker. Because while we will get very well intentioned, like we click submit, right? We do our edits, we get our copy edits, we do our commas. Our colleagues will say to us, oh, I hope we get it. You did such great work. I'm really, yep, crossing my fingers. And I'm collectively saying this, I don't think any of you want to hear this. There were more strong proposals than there were dollars available this round. Oh, no, thank you. We don't like to hear that. I used to type that when I was a grant maker. What an awful line. True statement, but awful line. We want to get the funding. We want to be the top score. We want to be the absolute yes. We want to get the money, right? Am I right? I'm not making an unfair assumption, am I? Let me know. Do you want the funding? Y for yes and for no in the chat box, just in case I'll give you that option, right? You want the funding, don't you? Thought so. That's why you're here. So when we think about this mock review process, the difference, it's going a step beyond. Copy editing, always important. Never stop doing it. Have someone, not you, ensure that you're getting the good grammar stuff done, that it is coherent, it makes sense, it meets your organizational standards. But the mock review process, above and beyond, very, very important and feasible to do with government proposals that have a scoring rubric, clear criteria, very possible with large foundations. The MacArthur Foundation, their 100 and Change program, the city Progress Makers, the City Global Innovation Challenge. There are lots of big foundation private grants that are very clear about what their criteria are and how you will be reviewed and scored. That means you have the opportunity to check your written work against their criteria and how they will be scoring you. But I don't mean you. And the reason I don't mean you to do the work is because you're too close to it. So there are lots of benefits to doing copy editing and mock review. The idea that I have on the screen here is this Venn diagram idea, that there are overlapping pieces of information that might be caught from one versus the other, but you're going to find different things in your copy editing process than you would in mock review. And those small pieces of overlap that might pop out of both, well, that's great. But the true overlap, what happens by doing both processes, is that you have the most competitive application possible because your language not only meets good grammar standards and your internal protocols, but it aligns best to the grant maker. Now, this is a blog. We had the link in the chat when you joined and got started. I just dropped it in the chat again for you. This is a blog you could read, which is a little bit deeper about the difference between copy editing and mock review, if that's helpful for you and your team. What mock review looks like, so different. It just depends on the application and your organization. And the idea is to give some time for folks to review, to provide feedback. It doesn't matter what the structure looks like. What matters is that you're building space for people to safely provide feedback that might be difficult for them to give. If they feel like it doesn't quite answer the question, or if they feel like it might not get all the points, you need to build a space where it's comfortable for them to do just that. Give us feedback that helps us understand, hey, I don't think we're going to get all 35 points for the need statement. I think we might get 30. That's tough for people to say. So we want to make sure we're building that psychologically safe space because we want to ensure that our language has been crafted, not to get 15 out of 20 in a section, but to get 20 out of 20. Now, we're going to start to wrap up our time together today. And when we think about mock review and what we learn, there will always be things that are out of our control, so it can't guarantee that we get funding. But there are a few key things that consistently have come out of mock reviews, that if we avoid these things, I feel confident saying these will always improve your language in service of having a higher chance of getting funding. So go ahead, start typing questions in the chat box, things you want to get answered before we're done for the day. And while you're typing, let me just quickly walk you through these 5 things that commonly have been picked up in mock reviews. Don't tell grant makers you are not sure how you will continue the program after the grant funding ends. Please instead describe for them your plans for fundraising. Please do not tell a grant maker you hope to be able to accomplish something. That does not instill confidence in them. Instead, tell them what you anticipate will happen. We will do something. They understand it is a projection, but hope is so passive in the language that it decreases their confidence in your abilities. Similar to number 1, but different, please do not tell the grant maker you need their funding to continue to operate. They do not care if your lights are on and your doors are open. They care about the impact you're trying to create. They care about the results you articulate in your theory of change. Tell them that is why you need their funding. Don't frustrate your reviewers. Please don't use acronyms. When you think about those outcome statements in your logic model, whether they're short-term, intermediate, or long-term, if you say something really big, like we will eliminate childhood hunger, you better be asking for, unfortunately, many, 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 many zeros. Right? It's expensive in any town, any community, any state, doesn't matter. It's expensive. Lots and lots and lots of zeros. If you were asking for $10,000, the grant maker is going to say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense with the timeline or budget. So make sure that your outcome statements align with your budget and your timeline. 5 quick things, but again, things that have consistently come out of the mock review process that I'd encourage you to consider so that you can achieve the funding success. Now, whether you do mock review or not, I do hope that when you are denied, you ask for feedback so you can think about what you could improve the next time around with your funding language to achieve success. If you get funded, please ask for your feedback. That is success that you want to try and replicate. So make sure you ask for that feedback. You can learn what worked, replicate the success. That'll get you, again, more funding success. So I'm going to check around in the chat box here real quick. You're also welcome to unmute at this point if you'd rather ask your question that way. But I get it. I don't ever have my questions while I'm in a session. I always have them next week or like a month later when I'm doing the thing that we talked about. So you are always welcome to email a question afterwards. You can drop me an email at diane@dhleonardconsulting.com. You're welcome to email the Native Learning Center if you're like, what was the email for the person who presents for grants? That'll work too. They'll help you get your question to me. If you prefer to connect on LinkedIn and ask a question in a DM there, it feels less like an email message. That's fine too. Wherever you want to ask your question is where we are happy to answer. All right, I've scrolled back in the chat. I don't think I missed any questions. I see lots of great participation today. Thank you for that. I'm listening for anyone that has unmuted. I don't hear anyone. But I've shared with you how to follow up if you have any questions. And so with that, I'll pass it back to the team. And I want to say thank you again for joining me today as we talked about crafting grant language for success. I hope that it helps you to secure even more money for your communities. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Diane. I went ahead and shared your email in the chat as well for all of the attendees. Please feel free to email any of your questions to Diane. She is very helpful. Also, please let us know. You can also put your questions in the feedback as well. We do send the feedback reports to Diane, and she does greatly appreciate those as well. So please let her know what you would like to see in the future. She will take it into consideration. Don't forget our next upcoming webinar is going to be Executive Leadership and Engagement in the Time of Crisis, Day 1. This is a 4-day webinar series, so please don't forget to join. Our show times are 2 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. CST, 12 p.m. MST, 11 a.m. PST, 10 a.m. Alaska time, and it is going to be on February 18th. Don't forget you can access this webinar recording as well as our previous webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. If you just go on YouTube and go on a Native Learning Center channel, you will find all of our playlists. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope Within a Native American Podcast, and you can also find that on the YouTube channel, or you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you again, Diane. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.